The flag was burning. Right there in the front row of Toby Keith's concert, actual flames eating through red and white stripes, while some woman held it up like a trophy. She was screaming, not talking, screaming, her whole face twisted up in this exaggerated rage that looked more like a performance than anything real. Black clothes, slogans written in Sharpie across her chest, hair wild, surrounded by her friends with their phones out recording everything. They were waiting for it, waiting for Toby to lose his mind, to charge down there, to give them the viral moment they'd planned. 50,000 people ready to rip her apart, security moving in, the whole place about to explode. And Toby Keith just smiled. He smiled at her. Then he sat down on the edge of the stage like he was watching a kid throw a fit at Walmart. The entire stadium went quiet. Wrong. This was all wrong. Where was the anger? Where was the patriotic fury? The woman's face changed, confusion breaking through the revolutionary act. Her friends' phones wavered. The crowd didn't know what to do. Their guy wasn't fighting back. "Are you done?" Toby's voice came through the speakers, calm as Sunday morning. The woman's mouth opened, but nothing came out. She hadn't prepared for this. "Because if you want to burn another one," he continued, "I've got 6 more on the bus. We can really make a statement." The way he said it, so casual, almost bored, it was worse than yelling. The woman tried to recover. "You think this is funny? This flag represents genocide." Her voice cracked. She was losing control of her own protest. "I think you showed up looking for a monster," Toby said, "and you're pissed off you didn't find one." Then he did something that broke her completely. He stood up, walked backstage for maybe 10 seconds, and came back holding another American flag. A brand new one, still folded. The crowd started to roar, but he held up his hand. He unfolded it slowly, deliberately, right there on stage. Held it up so everyone could see it. The woman was still standing there with the burned remains of the first one, smoke still rising, looking absolutely lost. "Here's the thing you don't get," Toby said, his voice cutting through the noise. "That flag you just burned, you had every right to burn it. You know why? Because of the people who died for it. My father wore that flag on his uniform. Men I've met who lost legs, lost arms, lost their minds in deserts, halfway across the world. They fought so you could stand here and burn this piece of fabric if that's what you wanted to do." He walked to the edge of the stage again, holding the new flag. "You think you're fighting against them? You think you're making some brave statement about oppression and imperialism and all that college vocabulary, but you're not brave. You know what's brave? Putting on a uniform knowing you might not come home. Brave is an 18-year-old kid from Nebraska, standing guard in 120-degree heat, so people like you can go to college and learn big words to call him a murderer. You've got the freedom to hate this country because better people than you made sure you had that freedom. And you don't even see the irony in that." The woman was shaking now, not with rage, with humiliation. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to be the hero, Toby was supposed to be the villain, but somehow he'd flipped the entire thing. Her friends were backing away, lowering their phones, realizing this footage wasn't going to play the way they'd planned. "You came here tonight thinking you knew who I was," Toby continued. "Thinking you knew who everyone here was, just a bunch of dumb rednecks who love war and hate questions, right? But you never asked any of us what we actually think. You never sat down with a veteran and asked them why they served. You never talked to a Gold Star mother and heard what that flag means to her. You just decided. You decided we were the enemy and you were the resistance. And now you're standing there holding the ashes of your big moment, realizing nobody's scared of you. We just feel sorry for you." Security moved in then, gently guiding her and her group toward the exits. She kept trying to look back, trying to say something, but Toby had already turned away, folding the new flag with care, setting it on an amplifier. The crowd started to cheer, but he shook his head. "Nah, no celebration for that. That girl just learned something she didn't want to learn. That's hard enough without us piling on." He picked up his guitar. "You know what the real difference is between me and her? I've actually been to war zones. I've played for troops in places where they burn our flag because they genuinely hate us, because they want us dead, because they see America as their enemy. And you know what I learned there? The people burning flags in those places. They don't have the option to protest safely. They don't get to go home to their apartment after making their statement. They're risking their lives. But her? She burned that flag, knowing the worst thing that would happen is she'd get kicked out of a concert and become internet famous. That's privilege. That's the most American thing I've ever seen. Being so safe, so protected by the system you claim to hate, that you can destroy its symbols without consequence. The media response came fast and it came confused. CNN tried to run with country singer humiliates protester, but the footage showed Toby being calm, rational, never raising his voice. MSNBC prepared segments about toxic patriotism, but then had to contend with him explicitly acknowledging America's failures. Fox News wanted to make him a culture war champion, but his refusal to let the crowd attack the woman didn't fit their narrative. The activist's own video, carefully edited to show only her burning the flag and Toby's response, got posted with captions about fascism and silencing. But within an hour, 30 other angles appeared from fans in the crowd. The full context killed her story before it could breathe. What spread across the internet wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't a simple hero versus villain story. It was something the media couldn't package properly. The woke outlets couldn't attack Toby without looking like they supported someone being intentionally disrespectful at an event she'd paid to attend. The conservative outlets couldn't turn him into a pure patriot symbol because he'd literally given her a full speech about how she had the right to burn the flag. Everyone was confused. Nobody knew what box to put this in. The activist became a meme, but not the way she'd hoped. She became the face of performance activism that backfires. Her friends stopped posting about it. Her social media went quiet. Someone found her college thesis online, and it was full of the exact kind of empty rhetoric she'd screamed that night. And people started connecting the dots between academic theory and real-world incompetence. The New York Times ran an opinion piece titled, "When Protest Becomes Performance," that used her as the central example of activism divorced from actual human connection. The writer, a progressive activist with decades of experience, tore into her approach, noting that she'd achieved the opposite of her goal. Instead of making people question patriotism, she'd made patriotism look reasonable. Instead of exposing Toby Keith as a mindless nationalist, she'd revealed him as someone capable of nuance. The article went viral in different circles, shared by people who'd never agreed on anything before. Young activists started using the footage in training sessions as an example of what not to do. Conservative groups used it too, but they had to contend with Toby's actual words, which didn't let them off easy either. 3 months later, a podcast tried to interview the woman. She showed up but spent the entire hour trying to reframe what had happened, insisting she'd been set up, that Toby had rehearsed his response, that the whole thing was coordinated to make her look bad. The hosts pressed her gently on the fact that she'd been the one who brought the lighter, who chose that moment, who created the confrontation. She didn't have answers. The episode got posted with a note from the producers. Sometimes the conversation reveals more than we expected. Translation, she'd exposed herself all over again. Meanwhile, Toby kept touring, kept playing, kept doing exactly what he'd always done. But something had shifted in how people saw him. He wasn't just a country singer anymore. He'd become something else, a symbol of the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout. Venues started selling out faster. His demographic expanded. People who'd never listened to country music started showing up because they'd seen the video and wanted to see the guy who'd handled that situation with such control. Veterans groups invited him to speak. Not to perform, to speak. They wanted to know how he'd stayed calm, how he'd resisted the urge to escalate, how he'd managed to make his point without making an enemy. He'd tell them the same thing every time. I've been angry enough for 10 lifetimes. I've wanted to fight, wanted to scream, wanted to prove I was right and they were wrong. But I've also held hands with kids in hospital beds who'll never walk again, and I've seen their parents trying to find meaning in their sacrifice. And I realized something. Anger is easy. Anger feels good in the moment. But it doesn't change anything. That girl wanted me to be angry because it would have proved her right. So I gave her the one thing she couldn't handle. Respect. Not agreement, respect. I treated her like a human being who was confused, not like an enemy who needed to be destroyed. And that broke her way more than any insult could have. The cultural impact kept spreading in weird ways. A sociology professor at Berkeley assigned the footage in a class on civil discourse. Students who came in expecting to analyze nationalist propaganda ended up in heated debates about the ethics of protest, the difference between performance and principle, and what it actually means to challenge power. The professor later wrote that it was the most engaged his students had been in years, precisely because the footage refused to be simple. A high school in Texas used it in their debate club. Teams had to argue both sides. Was the woman's protest justified even if poorly executed, or was Toby's response a masterclass in maintaining moral high ground? Kids who'd never thought about these questions suddenly had opinions, arguments, evidence. The woman eventually resurfaced, not with defiance but with silence. Her social media stayed quiet. Her activist friends moved on to other causes. Someone spotted her at a regular job, working at a non-profit that had nothing to do with flag burning or nationalist critique. When a journalist approached her for comment, she said only, "I learned something that night. I'm not ready to talk about it yet." That quote got picked up by a few outlets, analyzed, debated. What had she learned? That she'd been wrong. That protest requires more than performance. That the people she'd written off as simpletons were more complex than her theories allowed? Nobody knew. But the fact that she wouldn't talk about it, wouldn't try to reclaim her narrative, suggested something had genuinely shifted. Years later, when someone asks Toby about that night, he doesn't give speeches. He just says, "I had a choice. I could feed her narrative or I could break it. I broke it." And maybe she learned something. Maybe she didn't. But everyone watching learned something. That you don't beat extremism with extremism. You beat it by being so reasonable, so calm, so human, that the extremism can't find anything to grip onto. That's the fight worth having. Not the one where everyone screams. The one where someone finally stops screaming and says, "Let's actually talk." That flag he pulled out that night, the replacement flag he unfolded on stage, he still has it. He brings it to every show, not to wave around, not to make statements, but just to have it there. A reminder that symbols matter, but only because of what we choose to pour into them. And that night, he'd poured something into that flag that the woman burning the first one couldn't destroy. The idea that freedom means protecting even the people who hate you, and that real patriotism isn't about blind loyalty. It's about being strong enough to let others be wrong without needing to punish them for it. The media never figured out how to process that. But the millions who saw the footage understood it perfectly.